Hey everybody. So residential electric bills for many people are getting ready to change, or they've already begun to change. For many years, residential electric ratepayers have been lucky enough to only have a two-part electric bill. Basically, the electric bill will consist of a fixed charge, like a basic facilities charge, grid access fee, or customer charge. And then you would pay a volumetric rate based on how much electricity you use for the month. But with the rollout of advanced metering infrastructure, AMI, or smart meters, utilities can now see more metrics about the electricity you use every single day. They can see when you use it, how much you use at a given time, what time of day, etc. And thanks to the skyrocketing demand for electricity, thanks to this wonderful thing called artificial limited intelligence, or ALI, which the real name for it is AI, I call it ALI. And of course, the new demand for electric vehicles, which I've talked about in a previous video, which YouTube has decided is irrelevant and has buried it, but if you want to watch it, check that out. It talks about how electric vehicles, how the distribution infrastructure is probably not ready for EVs, but with the demand of EV charging and the demand of data centers for this wonderful ALI, energy companies are resorting to other measures to reduce demand during peak hours of the day. So, for example, commercial ratepayers for a long time, even well before the introduction of smart meters, have paid a three-part electric bill. There are, of course, those two parts I mentioned earlier, which will be the fixed charge as well as the volumetric charge. This is what you see on your bill as kilowatt hours, or kWh. It's a unit of electricity, or a unit of energy. But then there's a third portion, which is called the demand charge. So, commercial ratepayers, for example, businesses, factories, industrial companies, etc., they pay a fixed fee for having a service. They also pay for how much electricity they use in the volumetric rate, and they also pay for how much energy they use at a given time. More or less the peak amount of power they use in a certain amount of time for the billing month. That's known as the demand charge, and it's measured in kilowatts. A good majority of residential customers have no idea what demand is. They have no idea what the difference is between kilowatt hours and kilowatts. But residential ratepayers are being introduced slowly but surely to demand charges. And it's a way to try to shift residential electric usage away from peak hours of the day. And the reason why electric companies want to do this is because the cost of peak demand is much higher than the cost of non-peak demand. For example, let's say a very cold winter morning or a very hot summer afternoon, or an evening when people are cooking dinner, for example. During times of peak demand, energy companies have to bring on what's called peaker power plants. For example, natural gas-fired power plants, and these cost a lot more to operate, and therefore the electricity cost of that time of day is much higher. Now, some utility companies have been experimenting with time of use rates, where during the peak hours of the day, you pay an inflated per kilowatt hour price for your electricity. But demand charges were not really there, at least not yet. However, that's beginning to change. For example, the electric company that serves this area is an electric cooperative. They're known as EnergyUnited. They're the largest electric cooperative in the state of North Carolina. And in April 2026, they're rolling out a new rate schedule for residential and small general service members. So here's a look at the letter that I received in the mail earlier this month. It says, "A new rate for you. Dear EnergyUnited member, EnergyUnited is committed to helping members prepare for an evolving energy future. Our cooperative is implementing a new rate structure to offer members direct control of their bill. Our new rate focuses less on how much energy you use and more on when you use it. Effective April 2026, members can use all the electricity they need outside of peak demand hours at a highly reduced rate. There are only a few peak demand hours each day that you need to keep an eye on. This means using electricity outside of peak demand hours makes even more sense. For example, if you're using major appliances during the peak demand hours, you'll pay a higher peak demand charge. You can save money by spreading out your energy usage during the other times. You can lower your power bill by moving more of your energy usage to the other 20 hours of the day. Energy United is committed to supporting members through this transition with resources and guidance. So here's the deal about this new rate schedule. It introduces a demand charge. Now, this demand charge is not the same as the demand charge that a commercial or industrial ratepayer generally would see. Commercial and industrial ratepayers have long seen demand charges that are based off of the highest power use during any time during the billing month. This new rate schedule for residential and small general service, so small commercial members, is based on time of day. So during the hours of 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. during the wintertime, or the hours of 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. during the summertime. During those hours, Energy United will assess a peak demand charge. And the way this works is during those hours, your electricity meter, well, of course, your electricity meter reports this data 24 hours a day. But during those certain times of day, your highest 15 minutes of usage at a given time will be considered as a demand charge. So in a moment, we'll go ahead and dive deeper into what this means. We'll actually use their calculator on their website to show you more or less a breakdown of how this will affect your electric bill. But the thing is, demand, at least in the case of Energy United, it's measured during those peak hours based on the highest electric use during a 15-minute time interval, which is not a lot. Not a lot of time. What that means is if you have some sort of heavy load, your home has some sort of heavy load, that can really make up a good portion of your electric bill. Literally 15 minutes in the entire billing month during those peak hours can define, dare I say it, up to half of your electric bill. So what Energy United is doing is they are lowering the energy rate, more or less the kilowatt hour rate, from its current rate of 7.29 cents during the wintertime or 7.67 cents during the summertime. They're lowering it to 4.87 cents per kilowatt hour, which is quite cheap. But during the peak hours, they are assessing a demand charge of $4.40 per kilowatt. And as mentioned, this is based off of one 15-minute interval during the peak hours for the entire billing month. Your highest 15 minutes of usage. So, for example, my home has a heat pump system. During the wintertime, it typically would be running a lot during those peak hours in the morning. That's when the demand for power is highest because, well, the coldest hours of the morning, that's when the heating demand is the highest. Heat pumps had this wonderful thing called defrost. They also have another wonderful thing called auxiliary heat. And basically it is a heat strip, an air handler, that comes on whenever the thermostat calls for auxiliary heat or when the heat pump goes into defrost. That heat strip pulls 10 kilowatts. You can see where this is going. So let's say during those early morning hours, let's say it's a very cold morning. Let's say the auxiliary heat comes on. Or let's say the unit goes into defrost. Now, it generally will not stay on for very long, but think about it. Let's just think of the worst case scenario. Let's say my heat pump's running, which the heat pump itself pulls about 3 kilowatts. And let's say the heat strips come on, and let's say they stay on for 15 minutes. That's 13 kilowatts. Let's say it happens during the hours of 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. You know what the demand charge will be for that? $57. All it takes is one morning. one cold morning out of the entire 30 days of the billing month. $57. And this is where I think demand charges just don't work well with residential consumers. Now, granted, Energy United does have an alternative option. You can enroll in their Energy Advantage program to where you are only charged for energy and not demand, but during those peak hours, your energy rate will go from that 4.87 cents per kilowatt hour up to 19 cents per kilowatt hour, which is cheaper than the time of use rates I've seen with other utilities. If, let's say you have a house with an electric furnace, or you're just a heavy power user, where you constantly use a lot of power throughout the day, it would probably still be cheaper to be on the demand-based rate schedule, because I mean, $4.40 per kilowatt, $4.40 per kilowatt, times 10, that's $44, for example. 19 cents per kilowatt hour. If you're pulling, let's say you're pulling 10 kilowatts, that's 2.5 kilowatt hours in 15 minutes, or 5 kilowatt hours in 30 minutes, so on and so forth. So you can kind of see where this is going. The thing is, though, the issue I have with demand rates for residential customers is most people don't understand what they are. I spent a good bit of time trying to explain to my parents, which are they're not very knowledgeable of electricity. Most people are not very knowledgeable of the difference between kilowatt hours and kilowatts. And a lot of people will not know how to save money using this new rate schedule. Think about it. Most people, they have no idea what kilowatts are. Most people, when they think of electric usage, they think of kilowatt hours. They think, okay, I need to reduce my power usage. Well, with this schedule, yeah, that's true. You do want to reduce your power usage during the peak hours, but literally all it takes is one slip up and they got you for the whole month. So let's say my house has a heat pump. Let's say we have one cold morning where the auxiliary heat kicks in and it runs for, let's say, 15 minutes. That's $57 for the demand charge. Okay, I've already reached my peak demand for the month of 13 kilowatts. There goes the whole incentive to try to reduce power usage during those peak hours. So, yeah, once you've reached that peak demand, it's done. You're done for the whole month, unless you hit a higher peak. Then it goes up even further. So, yeah, demand charges on residential accounts. Yeah, not really a fan of it. Now, granted, this is only during the hour shaded in yellow on this sheet. There's other utilities out there, other electric co-ops out there, for example, that are charging for demand 24 hours a day during the billing cycle, which is absolutely ridiculous. Because let's say you have an electric vehicle, or let's say you have some sort of other high load. Let's say you are washing clothes and running the clothes dryer at the same time. You got your electric water heater going at the same time as your dryer. That's about 10 kilowatts right there, or 11 kilowatts depending on the rest of the loads in your house. I generally try to offset my demand for off-peak hours anyway. I've done that for quite some time. So let's say, for example, if I'm on a rate schedule that charges for demand regardless of time of day, it would be absolutely punitive to be charged a demand charge for a peak demand, or say a high demand that occurred during, let's say, off-peak hours, like say 11 p.m. So, granted, if you do know what demand is and how to manage it, yeah, you could save money with this. There's two things I'm going to be doing actually. Number one is I'm going to be installing a water heater timer on my hot water heater. Basically, what that will do is it will lock out the water heater from cycling on during the peak demand hours. And also, I'm going to go as far as to disable my heat pump's auxiliary heat strips during those hours. Now, let's say if it's a very cold morning. Yes, there's a chance that the heat pump will not be able to keep up and the temperature in the house will begin to come down. But once 10 a.m. comes around and those peak demand hours are gone, those heat strips can come on. But truth of the matter is, I normally use my wood stove anyway. But it's just an example. So yes, I'm not sure what to think about this. In a way, I'm not really a fan of it. It's going to cause electric bills to be less predictable. All it takes is one slip up, and you could have a super high bill. So that being said, let's go ahead and sit down at the computer and let's run some numbers through the website. Okay, everybody. So here we're looking at EnergyUnited's website, where they go over the new rate that's going into effect this spring. So it goes into effect April of this year, and it will be reflected on the May bill. So this is the new rate. We went over it earlier just a little bit. They have this convenient little calculator here where you can calculate your future bills. So basically we have a grid access fee of $50 along with a usage charge of 4.87 cents per kilowatt hour. You can see which they had reduced 35% roughly. And then a new peak demand charge of $4.40 per kilowatt. So basically here we have some pre-filled numbers. Let's say this person used 1100 kilowatt hours of power and they had a peak demand of 8.5 kilowatts. Their estimated bill total will be $140.97. So we'll take that number, we'll add in the renewable energy mandate fee plus a sales tax of 7%. So their bill would actually be $152 when you include the sales tax along with the reps fee and roundup. So for example, here we have an electric bill from earlier this year. So I used 672 kilowatt hours. My peak demand was 9.931 kilowatts. Now I should note this peak demand as of right now was the maximum monthly kilowatt. It was not during the peak demand hours. I'm really hoping that they get this fixed by the time that the new schedule goes into effect. So again, this was not during the hours of 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. This is actually just the peak demand for the month. But we'll use it for an example here. So we'll say that I use 672 kilowatt hours. And let's say my peak demand was 9.931 kilowatts. So the subtotal would be 126.42 plus the 75-cent reps fee plus 7% tax plus the roundup. It would be $137. So think about it. My bill would have basically gone from $107 to $137 with this new rate schedule, provided my peak demand actually occurred during the peak hours. So just because of perspective how much this can change. But now let's say, for example, my peak demand during the peak hours, let's say, was 4 kilowatts. So the subtotal will be $100 and change. So let's say 100.33 plus the reps fee plus 7% tax. It would be $109 with the roundup, so it would be $2 more. So in some cases, the bill actually would not go up. It would be about the same. But yeah, it just comes to show that all it takes is one slip up. Let's say, for example, my heat pump runs into a defrost cycle during, let's say, a really chilly morning, and let's say the auxiliary heat is still on. We're just going to say we're going to say a worst case scenario. Let's say I'm pulling 14 kilowatts. See how much that increased the bill? So after taxes and fees, it'd be $156. So yes, that demand really can make a difference on this new rate schedule. So really comes to show just how much the peak demand really can change things with these electric bills. Okay, right, for the next portion of this video, we're going to talk about the Energy Advantage rate, or the rate that's also available for opt-out members. So, this rate, instead of charging a demand charge during the peak hours, they assess a higher per kilowatt hour rate. So instead of the, was it 4.93 cents per kilowatt hour, 24 hours a day for normal, the new rate schedule that has the demand charges, this new rate schedule for Energy Advantage, during the on-peak hours, the rate goes up to 19 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, the electric meters in November of 2025, they took a software update. And since they took a software update, the meters now show the total kilowatt hours, the most recent demand reading, which is showing 0 right now, is kind of weird. 2025 kilowatt hours, which I think is off-peak kilowatt hours, and 342 kilowatt hours, which is on-peak kilowatt hours, I do believe. So what we'll do is we will just take these numbers and basically divide that by 3 to sort of get an idea of what a monthly bill could be with Energy Advantage. Okay, so let's go ahead and calculate a bill for, let's say, or calculate what would be the equivalent of a monthly bill for someone who's in the Energy Advantage program, or someone who has opted out of automated meter reads. So Energy Advantage is EnergyUnited's prepay service. Basically, you maintain a credit balance and your electric usage is debited from your credit balance on a daily basis. So the grid access fee for the month is $50. So that's, of course, over the course of roughly 30 days. And then you have the off-peak energy, which is 4.87 cents, and then you have on-peak energy, which is 19 cents per kilowatt hour. So I took those numbers I had recorded earlier and I just divided by 3, since it's been roughly 3 billing months since that meter had received that new software update. So we have 789 total kilowatt hours for the month, 675 off-peak kilowatt hours, and 114 on-peak kilowatt hours. So we have that grid access fee of $50, and then we have the off-peak charge of $32.87, and then we have the on-peak charge of $21.66. That comes out to $104.53, plus the reps fee of 75 cents, plus tax at 7%, roughly $7.37. That comes out to a total of $112.65. So again, look at the Energy Advantage rates. So now, for example, if we go over to the standard demand rate, our total usage will be 789 kilowatt hours. And let's say we had a peak demand of 4 kilowatts that took place during the morning hours, since we're in the winter season. Let's say 4 kilowatts. That will come out to $106 plus the reps fee of 75 cents. Plus 7%, $114. But let's say we had one slip up and we used, I don't know, 10 kilowatts. See, the bill jumped up to a subtotal of $132, plus the reps fee, plus 7%, $142 or $143 if you're in the roundup program. So yeah, $143 versus $112. So yeah, it really can make a difference. Okay, for the next one, what I'm doing here is I am simulating, let's say, a home that uses a lot of power. So what I've done is I've taken those numbers that I recorded off the meter earlier, and we're just going to say that as a total for 1 month, which, I mean, some houses do pull that much power in a month. A lot of houses actually do. So for example, let's say we have 2025 off-peak kilowatt hours and 342 on-peak kilowatt hours. That would be a grid access fee of $50, an off-peak charge of $98.62, and an on-peak charge of $64.98. And of course, this is the Energy Advantage rate. That comes out to a subtotal of $213.60 plus the rep fee is 75 cents plus $15 in sales tax. Comes out to $229.35. Okay, let's say for example that user is on the demand-based schedule. And let's say they pull 13 kilowatts of demand during peak hours, which is easily possible in a house that uses this much energy. So let's say they have a heat pump that runs a lot, and let's say it's using the auxiliary heat a lot, which would easily get up to this number of kilowatt hours a month. So let's say we're pulling 13 kilowatts during the peak hours. So 2368 total kilowatt hours, and of course the 13 kilowatts of demand during the peak hours, that comes out to 222.52 subtotal plus the reps fee and tax, and that gets you $238.89 or $239 with the roundup. So even in this scenario, the demand rate is still higher than the energy advantage rate. Now, what I think's going to be happening is I think Energy United very well might see a surge in people going over to energy advantage, and instead of getting a monthly bill, they just pay as they go. I'm not really a fan of it, but I do think a lot of people may end up making this move because demand rates, in my opinion, are punitive in nature. All it takes is one slip up, and then you could have a bill that is just as much as someone who, for example, uses a ton of power. Like I say, all it takes is one slip up, and bam, you're done for the month. This is why I'm not exactly a fan of seeing demand rates on the residential rate schedule. What this is going to cause is it's going to cause people to have to delay their dinner times until after 7 p.m. during the summertime. And if you have a heat pump system during the wintertime, well, yeah, that's definitely going to affect you unless you have an alternate means of heating, or you are able to retrofit your system to not use the auxiliary heat during those hours. So that's kind of my opinions on this new rate schedule. Like I said, it's not just an Energy United thing. This is actually a lot of utilities are doing this. And in fact, I'll show you a video I'll put in the upper right corner of the screen to a different channel that goes over a new Santee Cooper rate schedule, which is similar to this, except the demand charge is much higher. So anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.